Hi, I'm Ashley Smith Thomas, a millennial talking about freedom and national security for America. I'm the founder of Freedom's Fund USA, a nonprofit to protect freedom and national security. I am a speaker, advocate, and thought leader. I spent 2016 saving Christians targeted by ISIS in the Middle East. This was truly an eye-opening and life-changing experience as I watched and learned from my fellow Christians who longed for freedom. It was that experience that became the inspiration to start this show. In this show, come with me as I interview experts about key freedom issues in America and how we can protect freedom. Because if we lose our freedom, how can we bring freedom to the whole world? Let's take action together and let freedom ring. Welcome. My name is Ashley Smith Thomas, and I am the host of Freedom Talks. The purpose of this show is to educate Americans on key freedom and national security issues. And today, friends, I want to share with you that it's time for Americans to wake up because freedom is on the line. There's a movement that has infiltrated our educational system, and it's a Marxist movement as they push this curriculum called critical race theory that deems white people to be inherently racist and oppressive. But imagine this being taught to preschoolers, fourth graders, seventh graders, and those even in high school, that they are being taught that they are to be shamed for the color of their skin for being white. This is highly unacceptable. We see this Marxist movement even infiltrating our businesses, our corporations, our government institutions, and yes, even our U.S. military. But we are also seeing this being pushed in our churches as pastors begin to teach critical race. This is wrong on so many levels, as critical race is derived from Karl Marx, as Marx believed in separating people based on the class and their race. We are the United States of America. And if we continue doing this and pushing this curriculum, that we will become divided. This is not the divided states, this is the United States. And today I'm really excited to have two guests with me who stood up in Southlake, Texas to push back against the critical race theory. They ran for school board and won, and I am thrilled to have them here so that they can be sharing with you the importance of standing up in your community and why critical race theory can be defeated. So today I want to share with you all and introduce you to Cameron Bryan and Hannah Smith. So Cameron was recently elected to the Carroll ISD school board in Southlake, Texas. His record turnout election was one of the first statement wins against critical race theory in the country and included media coverage from around the world. Cameron's passion for children and strong belief that schools are a place for education, not indoctrination, led him to run for this important office at such a critical time. Together with his friend and now fellow trustee, Hannah Smith, he plans to ensure political ideologies like CRT are prevented from ever included in the CISD curriculum. Cameron is a civil engineer and a 30-year veteran in the aviation industry. He and his wife, Amanda, are proud parents of four, two daughters in college, a daughter who's a senior, and a son in the 7th grade. They are 18-year residents of Southlake. They love their community and plan to continue to fight to keep their school district the #1 district in the state. And then I'd like to introduce you to Hannah Smith. From a young age, Hannah Smith demonstrated a passion for education that would take her to Princeton as a student and teacher, to the Supreme Court as a religious liberty attorney, and ultimately to her beloved home in Southlake as an advocate for our schools. Hannah focused on education policy and the teacher preparation program to earn her degree from Princeton University and its School of Public and International Affairs. She earned her law degree at BYU. Hannah spent the next 2 decades involved in high-profile litigation at top law firms in the U.S. Supreme Court. She worked directly for Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Samuel Alito and later advocated successfully for religious liberty in state and federal courts, including 4 landmark victories at the U.S. Supreme Court. She has served as a legal spokeswoman on major news outlets, authored opinion pieces and articles on legal and religious liberty subjects, briefed policymakers at the White House, U.S. Capitol, the State Department, DOJ, and more. And she has provided expert testimony in support of Justice Neil Gorsuch's confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. While Hannah wasn't born in Texas, she got here as fast as she could. Hannah and her family have been proud residents of North Texas for 7 years. In Southlake, Hannah has served in Southlake school, city, church, and Metroplex communities. She has volunteered for the Carroll Independent School District School Board Budget and Finance Committee, the CISD School Board Student Health Advisory Committee, and the new CISD Superintendent Focus Group, and she's also a youth leader in her church. She's a member of the Southlake Executive Forum, Southlake Executive Women, and proudly served as a board member for both the DFW Alliance of Religious Freedom and the Religious Freedom Institute. She's given speeches at academic institutions such as American University Law School, Columbia Law School, Harvard Law School, Princeton University, Southern Methodist University, and more. She's made appearances on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, NPR, BBC, Sean Hannity, Fox and Friends, Wall Street Journal Live, Rush Limbaugh, Laura Ingraham, Lou Dobbs, just to name a few. She's also been interviewed for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Washington Times, LA Times, Associated Press, and more. Hannah and her husband, John, have been married for over 23 years, and they are proud parents of 4 children who attend elementary, intermediate, middle, and high schools in Carroll ISD, the youngest of which will graduate in 2032. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I'm so excited to have you all here to be our subject matter experts to educate our followers on just the importance of just defending our school system from critical race theory. But first and foremost, I want to say congratulations on your win and victory.
Thank you so much.
And I want to just start off by asking you all, why did you run for the school board? Why was that important to you?
Well, we were really surprised in August of 2020 when our district tried to pass a 34-page plan called the Cultural Competence Action Plan. I don't think anyone imagined when they moved to conservative Southlake that such a progressively leftist plan would be attempted in our school district. So I think everybody was just really surprised. And once we realized what was happening, we just stood up and started fighting back. And when the time came and the 2 seats were open on the school board, I just said, well, if not me, who? And if not now, when? Sure. I mean, somebody has to do it. And I think we were pretty well equipped to put our hats into the ring. So
it's fantastic.
Yeah, and the same for me. I just wanted to continue to serve our community. Like you read, our family's been in town for 18 years, and I've been, the last decade or so, I've been involved with youth sports and academics, coaching, mentoring, teaching, that type of thing. So, I just really wanted to serve our community, continue to serve our community. And this was something that came up in August. And I was kind of a little late to the game because I was the president of Dragon Youth Football at the time. And that's football's really big in Southlake, in case you don't know. Yes. And so when all this came about, I was just like, are you kidding me? We have to get involved. And so my wife and I talked and said, yeah, this is time. Let's stand up and fight. We can do this. And we did.
That's incredible. And so I love the fact that your platform was running unafraid. Right. That was just fantastic, because I know President Ronald Reagan, would always say, evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. So I thought that was fantastic that you ran on that platform. My other question is, I get all, with the critical race theory, I think a lot of people kind of try to figure out what that is, what does it really mean? And when you go online, particularly like Google, you get different things that pop up, and it's not always factual information. Share with us, what is critical race theory? And in this case, what is the curriculum that's being pushed or was being pushed in Southlake?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. I do think that there's a lot of unknowns about what critical race theory is, and some people don't exactly know what to expect when you talk about that in your schools. Critical race theory is an offshoot of critical theory. And it's a political philosophy or political ideology that tends to look at every structure in society based on who are the oppressors and who are the oppressed. So it's a way of looking at society to decide, okay, these are the people in power and these are the people who are not in power. So everything you look at through the lens of critical race theory will be looked at through that structure. And when you put race into it, then it adds an extra layer of, okay, so it's not just who are the oppressors, but which race is the oppressor. Mm-hmm. And so you have whites as the oppressors and blacks or other people of color as the oppressed. And I think it's a particularly dangerous ideology because at its core, it's also fundamentally anti-American because it really attacks the fundamental structures of our democracy. And the whole purpose of critical theory initially, and now critical race theory, is to destabilize those centers of power, to completely get rid of them and rebuild from scratch. So don't let anyone fool you when they say that critical race theory is nothing to be afraid of. If you really take critical race theory at its word, it is something to be extremely afraid of, because the end goal is to completely restructure American society.
You know, and I'll just add on to that just real quick. And you're never going to see critical race theory spelled out in a curriculum. In fact, the proponents of our cultural competence action plan say, CRT doesn't exist in the CCAP. Show me where CRT is. And we know that there were many elements within the CCAP that would introduce the CRT to our curriculum, such as equity audits of our policies and programs, assigning a cultural competence quotient to a teacher to be evaluated, punitive action against kids who commit microaggressions against underrepresented groups, and tracking and recording those on their permanent record until they get to be a senior. All of those elements are components of critical race theory. And when you start talking about critical race theory, you have to define what that is. And it comes under this all kinds of different terminology like diversity and equity and inclusion. You're seeing it come in through SEL, which is social emotional learning, these ed tech programs. It's very dangerous. They're teaching it to our pre-K kids. And you really have to be aware of where it is to be on the lookout for it. And that's what we're having to do.
It's also called culturally responsive teaching in some places, culturally competent practices, culturally proficient practices. There's lots of different terminology that at the root of it is this philosophy of looking through the lens of power dynamics in all of the structures of our society.
It was just unbelievable, because I looked online and was seeing that a lot of the verbiage is masked, under the disguise of diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality. And those all sound great buzzwords. And you think, oh, okay, well, that's not bad. We're here to talk about equality. But when in reality, it's incredibly divisive curriculum that's being pushed. You mentioned the microaggression. That is something that I've been hearing parents bring up lately, the microaggression and the social emotional learning. Can you explain that in more detail? What is that, and why should parents be concerned with the SEL teaching?
Sure. Well, I'll start with microaggressions. So microaggressions are defined as either intentional or unintentional slights, and the victim is the one who gets to decide whether or not it is a microaggression. So it's completely subjective in the eyes of the victim. And what's, I think, fundamentally wrong with this from a free speech perspective is that usually in the American lexicon of legal understanding, you always have to give people prior notice before you punish somebody for doing something wrong, right? So we have a whole system set up to outline what are the elements for each of these offenses. And so okay, if I do this, I'm going to be punished like this. But for microaggressions, there's just no way to do that, right? Because it's entirely subjective. It could be a look, it could be a glance, it could be a shrug, it could be walking by somebody, it could be saying something like, what is that food you're eating because it smells different than what I'm used to? Or it could be simply asking somebody, where is your family from? Because you're insinuating they're an immigrant family and not an American family. So things like this that just fundamentally, I think people understand are an attack on free speech.
Yes.
Not because you're trying to be hurtful or because you're trying to harm somebody. I think Cam and I both said repeatedly through the campaign, we don't want to see any child suffer. We don't want anyone to be discriminated against or harassed or bullied.
Sure.
But when you have innocent things that are said from a child who's genuinely curious, and then it's taken in the wrong way, then you see the real ramifications of tracking microaggressions. And it's quite terrifying, actually, if you think about the consequences of it.
Do you think that it's going to prevent and hurt children from freely having conversations in the
Absolutely.
future?
I said that in some public comments to our school board before I was elected. I said, I want my kids to be having these important conversations with their classmates about their cultural backgrounds and their different religion and their, immigrant experience. I want them to be able to ask questions like that to their friends, but they will be absolutely unable to do that because they will be scared that anything they say will be deemed a microaggression and they will be punished. And that's just sad.
And I'll give you an example, because because we're voted in doesn't mean that CRT is not going to be in our schools. It's already in our schools. I'll give you an example. My son came home this year one day from school, and he said, "Dad, I just want to tell you something." I'm like, "Okay." And he says, "I was at lunch with a friend of mine. It happened to be a Southeast Asian descent. And he said, 'Dad, I wanted to ask my friend what he was eating because it smelled really good, but I didn't, because I knew if he told on me that I asked, that I could get in trouble.'" And that right there tells you that somebody is teaching our children this, because my son would have never thought about that unless somebody had told him.
That is so unbelievable, because what that does is then that creates a culture of fear.
Right.
Of course it
And
does.
fear
Yes.
is so,
That's right.
it's bondage, because the children are not free to just ask such a simple question of, "Hey, what are you eating? Because that smells really good." And then fearful that his peer is going to tell someone. That is just unbelievable to me that there's that kind of pressure on today's youth. And then my concern is, by the time they get to junior high, by the time they get to high school, oh my goodness, what are they going to be like if they're so afraid to have conversations?
Right.
The second part of your question was about SEL.
Yes.
So do you want to talk about that?
Well, I was going to say, as far as the SEL, the TEA, which is the Texas Education Agency, has required through the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills that certain character traits be taught in our schools. Those character traits, some of them are good. Help me out here, Hannah.
Honesty, integrity, courage.
Right.
Sure.
Compassion.
But there's a few that, identity, self-identity, and what are
biases,
biases
and
and that type of
diversity
thing.
and different cultural backgrounds, that kind of stuff.
And they want that embedded in the curriculum from all the way from pre-K all the way up. So we have to be very careful of our curriculum, looking at our English, looking at our social studies, looking at civics, and making sure that this stuff is being taught in the appropriate way. We both think that character traits are taught at home,
Sure.
right? It has no place in education. But if it's required, we need to make sure how it's being implemented.
Well, that's good. Absolutely. And what started to, what happened in Southlake that brought all this attention from the national media to really hone in and focus on Southlake pertaining to critical race theory? What happened? How did you all get to this point?
So several years ago, there was a video that went viral on social media. It was after a homecoming dance in a private residence, obviously after school hours, not in an activity that was supervised by any school personnel. It was just a personal, private party. And unfortunately, some kids said some things that were inappropriate, chanted some words to a rap song that were inappropriate. And those videos went viral. And immediately, the school created a meeting between those students and the parents and the district administrators to talk about what they were going to do to address this issue. And as a result of that incident, there was convened a district diversity council, had over 60 members of the community, school teachers, students, administrators, who convened meetings over the course of about 2.5 years to create a plan. And the plan that they came up with was the 34-page Cultural Competence Action Plan. Now, a lot of the content in the CCAP didn't actually come from those committees. About half of it came in from the administration, and about half of it came up from the committees. And the members of those different subcommittees, one was a teacher training subcommittee, another was a communications subcommittee, another was student subcommittee. So there were different kinds of subcommittees. They didn't really know what the other committees were doing, right? And so in the end, it was all put together in this 34-page plan and presented as the work of the DDC, but they didn't even know most of what was in the plan, right? So that plan was then presented to the Board of Trustees in an August 2020 board meeting. And it was only presented on the agenda as something that would be information only. So just presented to the board as here's the, results of our work. But one of the board members decided to make a motion. And the motion was to accept the plan and to workshop it. Create some workshops so we can know what's in the plan and understand what's in it. And that motion was revised a couple of times, but ultimately voted upon and accepted 5-2. There were only 2 members of the 7-person board of trustees that declined to accept the plan. And so that was sort of the beginning of the community rising up and saying, we're not going to stand for this anymore. So,
the other thing too that DDC did, they took 2 actions. They created this CCAP, but they also made 340 plus changes to the student code of conduct. And many of those changes had like elements that were in the CCAP. So they are also trying to legislate CRT through the implementation of these changes in the student code of conduct, which still exists today. So it's just, those 2 items, just you can't introduce that into a community like ours and expect to get away with it.
Sure. And, I know recently Governor Abbott had mentioned that they banned CRT in the state of Texas. So what does that mean? And does that impact Southlake? And is the underlying tones of CRT still within the Carroll ISD?
So I should say that one of the main tools that the community used to fight back was doing open records requests. So we did a lot of open records requests to find out how much of the plan had already been implemented, what kinds of teacher trainings had already occurred, what kinds of surveys had been sent out to students and teachers, and asking for those to be submitted so we could review them. And one of the open records requests were for the text messages of board members prior to the board meeting at which the CCAP was presented. And those text messages revealed alleged violations of the Texas Open Meetings Act, because the Texas Open Meetings Act says that you cannot deliberate as official elected members of the school board on matters that are on the agenda prior to the open meeting. And the whole purpose of the Texas Open Meetings Act is to keep all of official business out in the open where the public can see it happening and not any backroom deals, right? So these text messages revealed that there had been a walking quorum or a daisy chain of at least 4 members of the school board that had deliberated about the CCAP and what they were going to do and what kind of action they were going to take in the meeting. So that became the basis of a lawsuit against those trustees and the district for violating the Texas Open Meetings Act. And those text messages were also sent to the criminal district attorney, who did her own investigation. She convened a grand jury, and that grand jury resulted in an indictment of 2 of the board members, the president and the vice president. Okay. So there was significant legal action that took place, and part of this civil lawsuit was a temporary restraining order, or a TRO, that stopped any further action on the CCAP. So the CCAP has been on hold as a result of that litigation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I had read that there was a victory of 70-30 vote there in Southlake. Can you explain what that vote was and what that was pertaining to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was the biggest turnout for a municipal election in Southlake ever. Typically, you'll see 2,800 to 3,500 votes in these non-general election timetables, and we had over 10,000 people come out to vote. So Hannah and I both received 6,900 votes, which is really amazing. And I tell you, we worked extremely hard to get those voters to the polls. It's very difficult in a community of 32,000. We had 21,000 registered voters. So approximately 45 to 50% came out to vote. Unheard of. Usually you're looking at 10% or less. And so we held over 70 meet and greets in a 14-week period, and we met with thousands and thousands of people in our community. And it was a huge education effort. So, like we were talking about earlier, our community really didn't know what was in the CCAP. They didn't know what CRT was. And Hannah and I had to go around house by house, all of our community, to educate them. And once you start educating your community, then they're like, really?
Right.
Are you kidding me? They say, yes, well, here it is right here in black and white. And, it's just a tremendous effort to be able to get out, meet people, talk to people, educate them, and then to get out the vote. I mean, we ran a professional campaign. I mean, we really did. We had call banks. We had professional
canvassers.
We had volunteers that went door to door handing out flyers. I mean, it was really a production. And, the bottom line too, our community was so behind us that we raised 3.5 times, both of us raised each 3.5 times more money than any candidate, including mayor and city council. So it was quite an event. It's kind of like the perfect storm.
And I think that just speaks to the level of involvement of our community, right? This mattered so much to them that they were willing to open up their checkbooks, that they were willing to commit the time to come and help, that they were willing to do whatever it took to make sure that we won, which just shows you how concerned they were about this plan passing.
Absolutely. And what would you say to other school districts that are facing a very similar challenge? How would you encourage them to push back and defeat CRT and getting parents involved?
So our playbook was really just get organized early, figure out who the like-minded parents are in your community, open up a private Facebook group where you can start communicating and talking to each other and educating each other. We hosted webinars for our community so that they could learn about CRT and learn about the CCAP and learn about the free speech implications and the due process implications. And then, we also did a lot of open records requests. So I would encourage folks to learn how to do an open records request. It's really easy, but you can get a lot of great information that will arm you with facts that you can then go to your school board meetings and present public comments that are both informed and focused on the point that you want to make. So open records requests, Facebook groups, education of the community, and then ultimately you're going to need an army behind you to help you with your campaigns. The other thing that I'll add is that there was a political action committee that was formed in our community, the South Lake Families PAC, and they did a great job of organizing folks into different committees, in getting them involved, and in raising money to fund various efforts in the election. So there was a lot of different people involved. It took an army, and I would just encourage other people who are trying to fight this to just follow those steps, and you can be successful too.
That's incredible. And what would you say to parents who have children in the public school system or even in Christian schools? Because we hear even critical race is infiltrating, religious institutions. We hear it, being taught now in churches and now in Christian schools. I speak a lot at various groups, and I have parents that come up to me and say, well, how do I push back against this? Because I don't want to run for school board. I don't want to run for city council, but how can I be a part in stopping this? What are some action steps that you could give viewers who are watching this that want to take action, but not run for school board?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've been telling people, you have to be very aware of what's going on in your child's classroom. Talk to your teacher often. When you see something, check their homework. What are they reading? What's in the library? All of these things you need to know as a parent. And if you do, then you have something that you can talk to the teacher about, you can talk to your principal about, go to school board meetings and speak about these types of things. It's very effective. So, just being aware, being involved in your child's education, our community, the parental engagement in our educational system is incredible. There are more parents involved in the day-to-day activities of our children on all of our campuses than I would say your average school district around the country. And that's why we found out about a lot of this stuff and why our community got fired up about it, because they were engaged, they were aware, and they acted.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I think, actually, the fact that a lot of kids were home in quarantine during COVID had a real impact on this, right? Because parents were able to look over the shoulder of their kids at home doing virtual education from home. And they could see what was going on, and they could see the brain pop assignments, and they could see the other ed tech assignments that were focused on, BLM and some other things that were very political and politicized. So I think that just continuing that level of engagement as we return back to normal and back to school as it was pre-COVID is going to be really important, because these things will pop up in the places that you least expect them to pop up. And we have to stay engaged and stay watchful.
That's so good. And I think that's something too that, as we see what's taking place here across our nation, I think finally Americans are starting to wake up and seeing what is this? What are our children being taught? And so I'm glad that, even though what happened with COVID and everyone's world was turned upside down, I'm really grateful though that parents were able to engage with their kids and see what was going on and what they were being taught. And so thank you all so much for sharing just the action steps. And before we leave here, I have to ask you, as we go into our 4th of July weekend, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means to me that parents get to choose how their kids are educated, that parents are partners with public schools in the education of our children. Parents are the first teachers of their kids, and freedom means that the school district really needs to understand that relationship, right? The first teacher of any child is their mom and their dad. And so freedom for me means that we have to have a school district that respects free speech, respects due process, respects freedom of association, respects freedom of religion, all of these basic fundamental tenets of the American democracy. Public schools need to be teaching those to our kids so that we grow a generation of patriots, we grow a generation of future leaders, and we grow a generation of kids who are going to carry on the fundamentals of the American dream. And that really is what freedom means to me, and that's why we stood up and fought back.
Incredible.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. That was very well put. I agree with everything she said. I tell you, we have to continue to create environments in our school where our children want to go to learn. They want to be able to go and be taught how to think, not what to think. Mm-hmm. This whole political ideology being indoctrinated on our children is just wrong. And it's definitely, Hannah said this before, it's un-American. Mm-hmm. And that's not what freedom is about. Our children need to be able to learn that they can go and they can speak their thoughts and they can think their own thoughts without being penalized and punished for that and having to think about what they say or think about what they do. So it's so important that we get our schools back, and we're going to fight every day to get our schools back. I mean, our schools across America are under attack. They just are. And we need, and it starts at the very lowest elementary levels. Mm-hmm. And so we need to start there and make sure that we're doing every single thing that we can as a school board, as a citizen, as a parent, to make sure our children get the education that they need. It's reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? It's not values, behaviors, and beliefs.
Right.
Right.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and to share just about the critical race theory, how you all won in South Lake, and then how parents can get involved and be aware, because we are literally at such a critical time in our nation and at a crossroads. So thank you all so much for sharing your
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. And as we conclude here, I just want to encourage our viewers to stand up and be bold, to push back against this critical race theory, to be involved in your community and in your child's life. I say this often, and I know you've probably heard me say this before, but President Ronald Reagan once said that evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. And it's going to have to take good people like us to stand up and push back against what is happening here in our nation, but more importantly, against these movements that are limiting and suppressing and oppressing our freedoms. And as we enter into 4th of July weekend, may we never forget the freedoms that we have and those who have fought for our nation, but more importantly, our founding fathers who signed the Declaration of Independence so that we could be free. That is so important so that we could pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So may we never forget that. God bless and take care.